Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. It's February, that's 2020, and that's almost 20 years since we started writing articles on the internet. 20 whole years. And the question that arises is, how do you write so much? How can you create so much? And how do you sustain it for as long as 20 years? Because when you think about it, we started back then and we've never missed a newsletter. In all of those 20 years, we've never missed a newsletter. We have recycled some of them. There was a time when I was just not writing. I just couldn't bring myself to write for some reason, and Renuka was desperately recycling them. Maybe 2 months. But barring those 2 months, it's always been a newsletter. So how do we do it? I've probably said it before, but what the heck, we can do it one more time. 3 methods. Let's look at all 3 of them. The first is something that I've read or heard and that I want to understand better. The second is stuff that I see totally different from others or even disagree with. And the third, questions that are asked of me, and I want to look at the same question in a different light. Let's start out with the first one, which is something that I've heard or read and I want to understand better. One of the earliest articles I wrote was based on a book called Positioning. It was by Jack Trout and Al Ries. Now, I'd read this book when I was in India and I was in advertising, and I never had any reason to write about it. I would just read the book. It was very interesting to me. I bought a different version of the book, and I guess it helped me in my copywriting along the way. But when I started writing articles, it seemed like a challenge to work out how I'd say what the authors have already said, how to explain it in a different way, or at least explain it in a way that I understood it. And over the years, whenever I read a book or I listen to an audio, I tend to find that I get stuck at certain points. The position where I'm stuck is usually something new or something that has been expressed in a way that I've never heard before. When I reach such a point, it's usually a good idea for me to write an article or to create a podcast. And in doing so, I have to understand it better and I have to explain the concept to someone else and figure out how the listener or the reader can apply that concept. Because so many of these concepts are just concepts. They don't always have a practical application, or at least they don't describe it in the sense, okay, how does this apply to consulting? And how does this apply to training? And how does this apply to products or leverage like info products? How does it apply across the board? That's not what is explained. And then somehow it's interesting to put that concept in and explain it to someone else. Let me give you an example. Take, for instance, the series on Masterclass, where author Dan Brown talks about how to write thrillers. Brown is an excellent writer, and his parents were teachers, and you can tell by the way he explains concept that he has very powerful teaching skills. He's very informative, he's very entertaining, but at one point I got stuck. And that is when he covered this chapter on heroes and villains. And he started talking about villains, and he said that the villain defines the hero, which immediately got my attention. And then I started to explore that concept in a systematic, scientific way. I mean, when you look at the brain audit, the problem defines the solution. So it's already there, that villain, but I didn't understand it. So I talked about it endlessly. I created a webinar about the concept. I even added it to the information products course, which we had in Munich. It was just a live workshop, not the home study. And the more I played with that concept, the more I explained it, the more I wrote about it, the more I discussed it on WhatsApp with the groups, the more I began to be able to look at it in a more systemized way. My whole goal is to understand the concept and then to somehow systemize it so that it can be used by me and by clients in a very systemized and predictable way. So many questions pop up when you're exploring something new. It's like going into a new city and then you want to explore this alleyway and that monument and that food place. And that's the whole point, that when you're reading and you get stuck, that's one of the great moments. And I try to explain my way out of that situation. I might start out with a high-level topic and explain that concept, or later on that might spawn 10, 20 different articles as you're untangling that, pretty much like one of those Apple earphones where you, not the ones that you get now, but the ones that you used to have, where you're permanently tangled and you're always fiddling with them and trying to untangle them. And that's the kind of joy that I get, and I think that you should use as well. Read something that kind of challenges you and then try to explain it to someone else. But even when you have a concept like that, you will find that your content starts to run dry at some point in time. When I look at the early days of my career, I often struggled to create new content. And whenever I've struggled, it's largely because I've had no input. If I listen to a book or I listen to some interesting podcasts, even if I've heard it before, it makes a huge difference to the way I see it. This morning, for instance, I was listening to Good to Great. It was one of the books that made us move from cartooning to marketing to opening up psychotactics. You'd have thought, well, I've read that several times before, and I have. But today, in that podcast, for some reason, Jim Collins, who's the author, was talking about the difference between a level 5 leader and a level 4 leader. And he said there's a huge difference. And immediately, my curiosity is aroused, and I want to know, why is it that just one level makes such a dramatic difference? That's all input, even if it's seemingly old information. Because obviously I missed it on the first round and the second round and the third round and maybe the 15th round. And today, when listening to that podcast, I'm thinking about it. And when you look at lots of the articles that have been written over the years and lots of the books, it's trying to explain the same concept in a different way, in a more systematic way, in a simpler way, with more graphics, whatever. It's not something new, which is what we talk about consistently, that it's not anything new. And people who are looking for new are looking for the wrong thing. You're looking at the same thing in a different way, and you're trying to explain your way out of that concept. And that's the first thing. If you can get stuck and explain your way out of it, that is a source for endless number of articles. And this neatly slides us to the second part of today's podcast, where it's about stuff that I disagree with. When I just joined advertising many years ago, my creative director called me an iconoclast, and I had no idea what it meant. I said, no, I'm not an iconoclast, and then I had to look up what iconoclast meant. But essentially, an iconoclast is someone that takes an icon and breaks it. That's what an iconoclast is at the very core of the meaning. And as we go through our everyday lives, we read an article about fitness, or, for instance, I read an article about the imposter syndrome. And I'm reading about it all the time, this imposter syndrome. I even wrote about it. But at this point in time, that one point in time when I was listening to it, I couldn't relate to what was being said. In short, I disagreed with the concept of imposter syndrome. To me, it is less about being an imposter and more about being a beginner. And that would be fine. I would run out of topics really quickly if I didn't disagree with a lot of things. I disagree with the concept of good habits versus bad habits. I have an issue with writer's block as a concept, and so it is with concept after concept. If you accept the world as it is, you're going to have trouble using this method. Or maybe you don't feel qualified to challenge all the material that you read, or even some of the material that you read. But I would encourage you to do so, to look at the world in a different way, even if it is just for your own writing, not necessarily something that you publish. I don't go about disagreeing with everything, but I started writing about things that went in the opposite direction, just like an iconoclast. And if someone said that pricing is supposedly scientific, I'd write about dartboard pricing. If goal setting talks about getting things done, I will talk about how I get only half or even less than a third of things done. In short, I'll do what most people shy away from. I'll take a nice big bite out of an existing concept. And as you're listening to this, you probably think, well, maybe you can take on controversy this way, but I can't. And the reality is I'm not a fan of controversy, but I get really bored with people accepting the world as it is, even when they're not getting results. Which is why if a copywriter suggests that a sales page starts with the headline, then you try to break it down, try to break apart the concept, and you figure out a more efficient way. Maybe the sales page starts from the bottom up. And you don't have to be disagreeable all the time. The first strategy was always about being agreeable. I read Good to Great, I agreed with the concept. I read Positioning, I agreed with the concepts. I just explained it in my own way. However, as you get more confident, as you see things in a different light, feel free to put forth your own method, your own system. And yes, there will be objections, but that will help you make that concept so much better. It's a very scientific, systematic way of kind of proving what exists out there as wrong, and then people proving you wrong, and then you fixing it and getting much better concepts as a result. So there it is. First part, agreement. Second part, disagreement. The third one is probably the hardest if you're not looking for it. And that third method is questions from clients. If you don't have many clients, so clients aren't asking you a lot of questions, the natural tendency is to say, well, clients don't ask me questions. And I will tackle that. But first, let me just tell you how I've gone about all of these years creating articles out of a single question. A single one-line question leads to a series of articles. When a client asks a question, I try and drop everything else that I'm doing, and I answer that question in great detail. Now, if I write a quick and shoddy answer, it might answer the question, but it doesn't bring out the detail. But if I answer with a lot of precise detail and examples, then the client is extremely happy and probably asks more questions. As you can tell, the article becomes more robust, and what's good for that client becomes good for other clients as well. What I'm really saying here is that I get distracted with the client's questions enough to write one article or two articles or three articles, and then as they come back asking more questions, I turn them into articles. This is why I love email. This is why a lot of people don't like email, because they get questions and they think this is such a waste of my time. But in reality, it is not a waste of your time at all. It is a way of connecting with your client, giving them that detail, and then creating amazing content, because that client comes back with great amount of gratitude, but they also come back with objections. just like you had at the start of this third section, which is, I don't have any clients. Well, I've heard that question before many times, so I know the objection that's going to show up, and therefore I can answer that question within that article. You may not have clients, or you might just be starting out. Or maybe the topic that you're tackling, well, you don't have many questions on that topic. In such a situation, your work does get harder. You have to be part of a forum. So if you're into copywriting, maybe you should be part of a copywriting forum. If you're into web design, maybe in a web design forum. But even if you don't want to pay any membership fees, you can go to a website like Quora, which is Quora, and people ask questions based on specific topics. Now, if you can take those questions and you can answer them, now you've got the basis for a whole bunch of articles. The best questions are always from clients, because it's not just that you're answering that question, but you're answering Molly's question, or you're answering Anjali's question. And the energy you pour into that answer, that becomes such a beautiful thing, because you know that you're not just throwing it out in the dark void out there. You're actually going and speaking to someone who possibly knows you, or you know them, or at least you have some slight connection to them. And that makes those answers so much better. We've been getting questions the whole time. And if you've been a member of 5000 BC, or if you've been on the list, you know that I keep pestering clients, ask me more questions, and they feel bad about asking me questions. But it's such a great resource to get those questions, because even if the questions have been asked before, the answers change. And so I will look at the same question in a different way. It seems totally bizarre to think that 20 years have already passed, and we've had so many articles and so many books and so many products and workshops, but a lot of them have stemmed from these three factors. The first method was simply how to explain yourself out of a tangle. And that's what I try to do in every book, in every podcast, in every audiobook, anything that I run into. I'll try to find a place where I get stuck and then explain myself out of that tangle, and then try and apply it to how clients could use it in a systemized manner. And that's what I do over and over and over again. It's like a flywheel. It goes on and on and on and on, and you're doing the same thing repeatedly, and you get to create hundreds of articles that way, really good articles. The second thing is the factor of disagreement. You might not viciously disagree with something. You might just slightly disagree with it, or you might have an objection, or you might have a different point of view. And clients have disagreed with this concept. When I've told them about it, they've disagreed with this concept because they feel that they're not qualified enough. And I don't think you need to wait for that moment when you're going to be qualified enough. How do you know you're going to be qualified enough to disagree? You know when you disagree, and you can see a different pathway that enables the client to reach their destination in a better way. I mean, when you think of the imposter syndrome, the moment I realized there is no such thing as an imposter syndrome, it's just a beginner syndrome. There might be this imposter thing, but largely it's a beginner thing. A lot of clients said, yep, that's me. So am I qualified? Do I have any research? No, I don't. But that's what I'm going to put forward. And that's what I did, and that's what I suggest you do. So that's the second way, which is if you find a way to disagree or change the perspective, don't call it disagreement, call it reframe. Just reframe it. And that will make someone's day so much better, and you've got your article. And the third method is just to take client questions. And client questions are just amazing because you're speaking to a real person. If you can't get those questions, go online. It's more tedious to find it that way. But if you feel that you need another method, another source of inspiration, well, go online to Quora or some site like that and answer the question. Answer it right there, because the person might come back and ask you further questions. So that's the benefit of websites like that, where you can answer the question on that very spot and then have it sometimes taken apart, but largely it improves your article. And that's how we've written stuff for 20 years. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. As we turn the corner in January 2021, we have the Info Products course. And as you probably know, if you've been listening to this podcast, it's one thing to create a product. It's a completely different thing to get the customer to consume the product and then to come back for more. And this is a bit like running a restaurant. The first time a customer comes into the restaurant, you spend the most money trying to get them to sit there, taste the meal, enjoy themselves. When they come back the second time and the third time, that's kind of where the restaurant makes the money. Now, this is good for both parties. It's not like a one-sided thing. The customer wants to come back and you want the customer to come back. And yes, this is called the Information Products course for want of a better name. But essentially, it's how to get a specific, even lesser amount of information across to the client so that they can apply it. Because we have too much information. What we need are results. We need things that we can apply. And that's what the course is about. It shows you how to put it together. That's happening on the 23rd of Jan 2021. There is going to be a waiting list, even though it's a home study, self-study product. And there will be only 25 courses available. To get on the waiting list and to be top priority on that waiting list, you have to go to psychotactics.com/info-goodies. That's psychotactics.com/info-goodies. And of course, you get some goodies as well, so you can see for yourself how good or how valuable this information is. So that's Jan. And then in Feb, on the last day of Feb, which is the 27th of Feb, we have the sales page course. When you create the product, you have to sell it, you have to know how to put the sales page together, or you have to pay a very expensive copywriter. I would struggle putting a sales page together, so this is part of my struggle. How to put a sales page together at blinding speed and make sure that all the elements are there and all the curiosity is there and all the triggers are there. And that's really what the sales page course is all about. Now, there's going to be a home study version of this, and there's going to be a live version. A live version is online, obviously. It goes day by day, week by week, over a period of 3 months. And you can decide whether you want a home study or whether you want to be on a live course. You'll get more information about the waiting list and all of the rest of the stuff at the beginning of 2021. So just so you know, it's coming after, 7 years? 8 years? 8 years. And that's pretty much it in Psychotactics land. If you've been wondering whether you should join 5000 BC, then this is probably a good time. It's the end of the year. And it's the time when we all feel like, how did this year go? And how can we make the following month, if not the next few months or the year better? So 5000 BC is a good place because the people there are kind and helpful. And you'll see for yourself that if you're keen on moving ahead, then 5000 BC is the most supportive place that you can find. I'm not saying the most supportive place on the internet, but it comes pretty close. So that's pretty much it from Psychotactics land, the end of the first rerun. 5 more to go. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now. Still listening? This episode was about 20 years of writing newsletters in a row, but there was a time when I just stopped writing for a while, and Renuka was quite frustrated. It wasn't that I had writer's block. It wasn't that I'd forgotten how to write. There was no stress. But probably I was just very tired. It does take a lot to turn out a newsletter week after week after week. And you sometimes get very jaded and you have no ideas. And what I had to do was to have like a stop doing list. To stop doing all the things that were getting me tired needlessly so that I could focus on the things that were important.
And I think this period lasted almost a couple of months. Now, the good thing is that just like we're running these reruns here, you can rerun a newsletter. Once you start writing it, you don't have to keep writing it. From time to time, you can have reruns of your newsletter. So there you go. That's how we've pulled through when things were not so good, but also when we've been on holiday, like we are now. And that's when you use reruns as well, just like they do on TV. So use the reruns. And that's it from me. I'll say bye for now. See you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.